Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Lewiński. In the wake of the much-anticipated Trump-Putin summit in Alaska, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has already arrived in Washington for high-level talks with the US president. Accompanied by his European allies, Zelenskyy will try to ensure Ukraine's position does not become even more precarious as a possible peace deal looms on the horizon. Today, we'll try to piece together what this agreement could look like, from security guarantees that Ukraine covets to the territorial concession that it dreads. Joining us now is Marta Prochwicz, Deputy Head of Warsaw Office of the European Council of Foreign Relations. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thanks for having me.
So let's begin with the fundamental question, security guarantees. We're still vague on what these could be, but this is new. Mr. Witkoff, the main negotiator for the Ukraine peace deal, said that this is a breakthrough. Russia is actually agreeing to security guarantees, but these security guarantees will not be a part of NATO. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, I think we should start from the larger picture. And the larger picture here is that security guarantees are something that the Europeans and the Ukrainians have been asking for a very long time. So given the fact that this has now been mentioned and put into the environment in which we're functioning in Washington, D.C., it seems to be that the Europeans and the Ukrainians might be getting what they've wished for. But
at least partially, because Trump also said no NATO for Ukraine. He said this actually in all caps in a post on Truth Social, also adding that regaining Crimea is not on the table for Ukraine either.
No, I should have premised it with this. I don't think that this will actually happen in the form that it's being said. So while this is absolutely, the security guarantees are what the Europeans and the Ukrainians want, I have big doubt about whether this is actually what has been said during the negotiations. And there are conversations going on right now that would point to the fact that there may have been a misunderstanding on the American administration's part as to whether Putin would accept this, because we require Putin's acceptance of these security guarantees in order for them to be implemented. So it's a double gamble. There's not only the unknown as to whether Putin actually said this and the American administration understood this correctly, but at the same time, there's the fact that the Americans have been reluctant and saying openly for a very long time since the Biden administration and now under Trump that this is absolutely not something that they would provide. Of course, the words are now being put forward by the U.S. administration. So I think that in some form, this is the way that they're trying to get the Europeans and the Ukrainians to the table, giving them something that they want. But at the end of the day, it's absolutely going to be short of everything that the Europeans and the Ukrainians want, which is NATO membership, which is Article 5. It's not going to be anything like that. It might be some kind of backstop by the Americans, which is actually not the worst thing to get if there is a reassurance force by the European coalition of the willing going into Ukraine or adjacent to Ukraine. That's, I think, one small possibility and would be a major gain on the European side.
But there are so many questions here, right? Because first thing, a misunderstanding. Again, I mean, there were reports that Mr. Witkoff allegedly misunderstood Vladimir Putin during a meeting in Moscow concerning which territories would be going in which way. He understood that Russia would be giving away much more. Right now, it seems like Russia is hardly giving anything away. And a related question. So if these are not really security guarantees, but simply this backstop, so this reassurance for possibly the forces that could potentially monitor the ceasefire, then this, well, it falls short of anything that Ukraine would have wanted. Would Ukraine even accept this?
Absolutely, and there is doubt. I mean, you just pointed to the fact that this has already happened within the span of what has been a week. There's been a misunderstanding, and one major problem that the Americans are forgetting while negotiating on behalf of Ukraine is that, first of all, they do not have all the history, they do not have all the knowledge, they do not have the emotional capacity in order to understand the scope of this conflict. At least this administration does not. not, they do not have the linguistic capacity to understand everything that is going on. And there have been misunderstandings, and there might be a misunderstanding when it comes to this as well. We haven't seen a statement from the Kremlin about that from their side saying, yes, we have agreed to security guarantees. So until that's on the table, I don't think that we should consider this a realistic fact. And these negotiations will drag on for months. And if Ukraine does not get some kind of security guarantee and a ceasefire, then I think that this is a terrible deal for Ukraine. And you mentioned, I think you said the words a monitoring mission. There's no monitoring mission in order
there is
to
no
have
ceasefire.
Well,
and that's another thing that was actually dropped. That was dropped during these talks. There were expectations that perhaps a ceasefire would be on the cards, at least a limited one. And now, apparently, we don't need a ceasefire because we want a comprehensive peace agreement instead. We also had results of that yesterday at night, another attack against Ukrainian cities. And this will continue, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the major change that we're seeing here from the U.S. administration. First of all, I think under certain pressure from Vladimir Putin, number one, and listening to Vladimir Putin's words, and on the other side, Donald Trump really wanting to be a peacemaker, really wanting to get a deal done, yet another in what he views deal. And in order to facilitate that, what he has done is he has swapped the ceasefire from precondition into actually an outcome of the negotiations, which is just untenable because the Russians have not followed through on any agreement that there has ever been in the past with the Ukrainians. So they are constantly violating everything from the past agreements, and there is absolutely no belief, no trust that they will ever stand their ground, and not stand their ground, but actually listen to any agreements further on.
So Poland's foreign minister emphasized that we've already had security assurances for Ukraine under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. That didn't get us far, though, did it?
No, absolutely it didn't. I mean, everything since then has fallen apart, and it is in Russia's foreign policy, in Vladimir Putin's mind, that he would like to see Ukraine annihilated. That's one element, but the wider game that he's actually playing is his foreign policy goals are much broader than just Ukraine. At the end of the day, Ukraine is actually just a little spot within the whole paradigm of all the different changes that he would want to see in foreign policy, and those include changing the European security architecture. So I think in these negotiations that we saw in Alaska, what mattered apart from the detail happening on Ukraine, which is absolutely crucial for European security, is actually a broader architecture that Trump and Putin are now facilitating, moving us into a new era of resetting relations between the United States and Russia, and into a new global order in which major powers are going to be delineating spheres of influence. So from a European perspective, that is also a grave danger.
So is Trump actually trying to pull off a reverse Nixon still, even though many people said this is not going to work?
No, I don't think. I mean, that was put on the table, and there were certainly fractions within the U.S. Department that want to see that happen and that do believe that it's possible. But I think with time, over these last 6 months, they have seen that Russia is close to China, number one, and that it's very difficult by now to pull them apart because Russia relies so heavily on China. But second of all, Russia is just not that big of a player with China. It's not important enough to try to reverse Chinese policy.
So if not that, then why would America insist so heavily on resetting these relations? I mean, trade with Russia, they say there are enormous opportunities, but data shows that that was not really that substantial. I mean, there are more important trade partners to the US, like Canada. Mexico, the European Union. Russia was just a footnote there by comparison.
Yeah, I think it's two things. On the one hand, Donald Trump has a policy of attacking the weaker opponents, not opponents actually, also those considered allies. So in his way of deal making, he is harder on his allies, on Kiev. He's giving the stick to Kiev and he's giving the carrot to Russia. But he highly respects and views the world as a place governed by autocrats that have power over their people and that do not have to abide by democratic rules and are therefore seen in his eyes as weaker. So that's one element of the puzzle. He just gets along with those kind of leaders. Then on the other hand, he has traditionally not seen Russia as a threat. I don't think that he does, despite everything that the Western alliance, that NATO, that Europeans, how they view Russia historically, and a large part of the Republican, or the majority of the Republican Party. He doesn't. So his idea is to reset relations with Russia in order to get other concessions. And the other concessions that he wants to get are on the Middle East, on Iran, on Syria, and also to weaken the Europeans. Because, and I know that this sounds like a very blatant statement, but from what we're seeing and the type of pressure that Donald Trump has been putting on the Europeans when it comes to tariffs, to his rhetoric, to his push on big tech in Europe, he views, and he said this in his first term, he views the Europeans as their foe. So this is also a way of putting the Europeans down. So it's a very dangerous game that we've entered, because we now have to be accommodating, and this is what Zelenskyy and the Europeans are doing now in Washington. They're accommodating somebody who actually does not serve their interest, but they need to do that in order to put their hand forward and be at this table.
So it's a very complicated scenario indeed. Marta Prochwicz was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Absolutely, thanks.
And I'm Jan Środowiński. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us.